All right, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Hans Balmarcus, Director for the Intrapreneurship Conference. Thanks for taking the time today to join this online session. And if you're having lunch now, and enjoy it. We have about 45 minutes, so let's dive right in. As innovation leaders, it's our job to deliver the next big thing and do that fast. We have to figure things out on the go, and more often than not, we lack the resources and support we need. So that requires unique skills and traits like resilience, agility, and grit, as well as the right habits to stay fit. So how can you create the space for innovation for yourself, for your team, your organization, your ecosystem? For answering that important question, I'm pleased to introduce to you Mark Bidwell, who has spoken at some of our past events. Mark brings more than 20 years of experience as an innovator, entrepreneur, and executive in well-known companies like Hays and Syngenta. Now he's an entrepreneur, chairman and board member of 2 companies, as well as founder of the Innovation Ecosystem, whose mission is to help make individuals and organizations more innovative and entrepreneurial. Since we always got a lot of questions on the team of personal leadership for innovators, I invited Mark to share his own lessons learned as entrepreneur, but also what he learned from more than 50 leaders and experts from around the world. So if you stick with us till the end of the webinar, you'll hear more about a program that we have developed for a small group of innovation leaders looking for support to accelerate their results in 2017. Now, before I hand over the mic to Mark, please do know there's a chat box in this tool. And just to make sure that you know where it is and how to use it, while you're eating your sandwich, maybe can you just go to this chat box and type hello or any word there so that we know you're online and you found it. All right. There I see. All right, Mark, welcome.
Thank you very much, Hans. It's a great pleasure to be back here with you. And welcome to everyone. I mean, I know people are dialing in from multiple time zones, from a wide variety of organizations and industries. And I do want to thank you for taking your time out today. I mean, I imagine that you're all very busy. You face multiple demands on your time. And so I am very grateful for the attention that you'll give me over the coming best part of an hour. So the subject of my talk, and Hans, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Subject of my talk is creating space for innovation, and that's essentially what we're doing together today now. You know, you're all taking time out to learn from others, and you're going to hear some of my successes, some of my failures. You know, hopefully you'll be able to reflect a little bit on your personal and on your professional innovation agendas, and I'm hopeful that you're going to hear. You know, you're going to hear something that really resonates, and you might see a way forward to help you, better go after your vision, if you like. And you might also feel something that touches on your situation and that you can grab hold of, perhaps a tool or something, and take back into the workplace. So hopefully this will be of value to you. It's also called creating space because the need to do this is a lesson that I've learned several times, and I continue, to be honest with you, to have to relearn and relearn. My early innovation mistakes were down to not creating this space, not stepping back and reflecting, not spending enough time on the questions that really need to be addressed, and not creating the environment and the conditions in my team, either direct reports or in my organization, for innovation to thrive. So it's my intention to use this time together to kind of create this space. So let me start by telling you a little bit about me and my background. And this is, as luck would have it, my computer is already on the blink, which is somewhat frustrating. Hans, can I hand over to you to take control of the slides?
I'll get it set up. Just wait a minute.
So this is an example of creating a little bit of space for you all while we get the technology working. Excellent, Hans, very good. So thank you. If we can go to the next slide. So my background, I'm an anthropologist by background. And as a result, it's my firm belief that, the only truly sustainable source of competitive advantage comes from building a culture of innovation. So here you see the famous Peter Drucker quote. I've been fortunate enough to work for some great companies in my career to date, some of which you'll be aware of. for example, the Hay Group, in 1995, I founded and launched the first information business, or first online business for the company, for Hay Group. And this was an online reward business that we put out into the market back in 1995. Made huge a number of mistakes on that journey, but I didn't make enough mistakes to kill that business. And this business grew into $150 million of sales and was subsequently sold very recently to Korn Ferry for almost $500 million. And that slug of information business that began way back in 1995 contributed a significant amount to that final price. More recently at Syngenta, I ended up leading a $2 billion business unit, and much of my talk in the next few minutes is going to come from this experience. And it's also supplemented by my experience. At the moment, I'm chairman of a company called BC Platforms, which is in the fast-growing genomics software, active in the ecosystem of gene sequencing, next-generation healthcare, and human longevity. And most recently, I founded a company called Innovation Ecosystem, which essentially Hans mentioned earlier on. I mean, I did this for three reasons. Firstly, to help build out my network. After 12 years in a large company of Syngenta, I recognized that the larger the company, the smaller your world, and I wanted to actually expand my network. Secondly, I really wanted to stay fresh and build my understanding of innovation beyond the narrow view that I occupy, having been in a large organization. And thirdly, I did want to give something back, and I did want to make available the resources either that I used in the course of my career in the corporate world to actually help me generate some of the successes, or that I wish I had access to in the course of my career. And so, I'm going to share some of these resources with you now, and you can get them at the end of this webinar as well. So if we go to the next slide, the Innovation Ecosystem started off as a podcast series, and we've interviewed over 40 leaders, chief executives, heads of innovation in world-class organizations, some of which you'll see on the left-hand side. You might recognize a number of them, as well as, and we've been talking to these leaders about change, about leadership, and about innovation. And so you'll recognize some of the companies, some of the individuals perhaps you won't recognize, but to the left-hand side, we have a guy called Rob Swan, OBE, who's the first man who's to walk to the North and the South Pole. And you might be wondering what's he got to say about leadership? Well, I mean, two things. Firstly, he's been in extreme environments, and he takes teams of executives into these environments. And so he learns a lot about leadership and talks, on the world stage. He's got a great TED talk. But also, secondly, he's actually developed a 50-year mission, and you can go onto his site, www.2041.com, and hear about his mission. He's a remarkable man, and you can download his transcript on the site. But I learned a huge amount from Rob. Going round, next person to the left, to the right, this is a guy called Larry Cunningham, who is the official biographer of one of the most successful financially and also in terms of sort of sustainable companies. This is Berkshire Hathaway, one of the largest corporations in the world. And actually, you can see behind me, this is a bust of Charlie Munger, the number 2 in Berkshire Hathaway. But what Larry Cunningham talks about is how do you actually build out the moats to defend your business from disruption. They're in 50 different businesses. Fascinating individual, huge insights. Going around, David Allen, who's bottom left, the author of Getting Things Done. This is possibly, I would say, the most fundamental set of tools that any executive or any leader in the 21st century needs to master. We all live in a hugely kind of over-caffeinated world where everything happens all the time relentlessly. We've got huge demands on our time, and he gives the process for actually managing that. We brought him into Syngenta, and my boss, head of marketing, referred to this as the best ROI he's ever seen of any kind of training program. And I've interviewed him on the earlier show, and despite the fact we had his dog actually snoring in the background, so the audio quality wasn't very good, but the quality of the insight into how do you actually create the space for creativity, for innovation, for breakthrough thinking was absolutely fundamental. And I do urge you to, if you haven't come across this guy, look him up. He's a remarkable individual. Then finally, most recently, earlier this week, I interviewed Michael Gervais. Now, probably won't be very well known to you, but one of his clients is a guy called Felix Baumgartner, who was a man who jumped from 39 kilometers up above the above the earth. And Michael worked with him to actually help him on his performance, how to boost his performance, how to get his mindset right. So these are just some of the resources that we've got access to. Now, as a result, if we can go to the next slide, Hans, please. We've received lots and lots of interest from lots of different, resources, Inc. magazine, Psychology Today, London Business School. I've been invited to speak at a number of these conferences. And I think the reason, this has been a huge experiment for me and made lots and lots of mistakes. I mean, I don't think I even knew what the word podcasting meant a couple of years ago. But the reason this has been so exciting, I think, or so interesting is, if we go to the next slide, what we've done is, we're addressing really relevant and enduring topics that many of us face in our work. Topics around leadership, change, and innovation, particularly if you're sitting in an organization that's characterized by changing regulatory environments, maybe changing competitive environments, at the risk of a disruption where maybe your innovation machines, your traditional machines, aren't actually functioning the way they used to. And so as a result, the topics that we're covering and the tools and the insights that we're uncovering and making available are resonating in our audience. And hopefully you will find this conversation of interest. I don't know if anyone in chat, might be worth asking the question, how many of you have actually are in large organizations that are facing the risk of disruption and trying to establish how do you actually deal with, how do you drive your innovation engine in order to deal with these changes? Most recently in the Harvard Business Review, this is actually November, so the current issue, you can see there's a whole section on ecosystem innovation, which is quite remarkable. This language is resonating in the marketplace. So anyway, so what I'd like to do now is just talk a little bit about the principles behind how we think about innovation, and then I'll get into some case studies. If we go to the next slide. Thanks, Hans. So there are four core principles that I hold very dear to myself around innovation, and what I'm trying to do here, and what I've been trying to do on and off for much of my career, but explicitly I'm doing it now in a far more formal and systematic manner, and I want to share it with you. Is firstly, I'm seeking foundational knowledge. This is what I call the kind of lead domino knowledge. So kind of knowledge where if you can master something, master X, then Y and Z follows very quickly. So core foundational knowledge that really is transformative, that does most of the heavy lifting, that enables you, to exercise the 80-20 rule. So I'm looking for stuff that works, that can have a huge impact if you can get on top of it and if you can really master it. Secondly, I'm looking to leverage other people's experience, which is drawing on some of the guests I mentioned. Learning isn't easy; it can be painful. I also like to learn other people's mistakes as well, wherever possible, versus making them myself. Although I'm not always sure I do a very good job on that one. The third area, I don't have an MBA. A lot of my knowledge, what knowledge I have and experience, comes from learning in the trenches, and as a result of that. I have a strong belief has been borne out, I think, from a lot of conversations with people over the years, is that what's most important is the psychology, the mindset. That does the bulk of the heavy lifting, and the strategy and the tactics that constitute the remaining 20% of the results. So if we start with psychology, start with mindset, which flows into culture, that does all the heavy lifting. Hans, there's quite a lot of noise in the background. I don't know whether that's you or not. Sorry about this, everyone. The final piece is around, I have a bias for tools that work, for proven tools that enable us to embed new habits and disciplines in one's work set, in one's work life. And I think one of these things, this is a really important point. The habits or the tools build new practices, build new habits. And success does leave clues. So when you look at people who've been hugely successful at innovating, they've left clues, and often there is a tool there that has been used to create the practice. And so I want to share some tools here with you, which I think which characterize foundational knowledge, if you like. So, and I suspect that many of you on the call now, probably will relate to this approach. Here you are, you've taken time out to sign up to a webinar where you're clearly interested, I think, in acquiring some kind of foundational knowledge, learning from me and my mistakes and some successes. We're going to get a little bit into mindset, and perhaps that, there'll be one or two distinctions I could make, which will shift a little bit of how you think about your work and your career, and also some tools. And I'll let you have some tools at the end of this. So let's get into the core of this. On the next slide, there are essentially 4 lenses, if you like, or 4 domains of innovation. And my preference has always been to start with the individual, with you, with me, and to build out, from self into team, into what you as a leader, whether you're a frontline leader, whether you're a project leader, or whether you lead a huge organization. What do you as a leader, are you as a leader, do you take up space as many leaders do, or do you actually create space? And I'll come back to that distinction because it's a really important distinction. Then, how do you create the conditions for innovation in your organization? So that's the next, that's the third tier, if you like, the third lens. How do you shape the culture, which is a central element of long-term sustainable innovation? This is the Peter Drucker quote I referred to earlier on. This is what Warren Buffett has done in his organization of Berkshire Hathaway. He has created a remarkably strong culture, which enables the ongoing engine of innovation to continue to fire and generate the results that they're generating. And then finally, and this is the new frontier in my mind, if you like, the new frontier. So this is beyond matrix management into ecosystem management, and I'll touch on that in a minute. So that's the model I'm going to take you through, and what I'm going to do is give you a couple of examples of tools and of case study for each of these 4 areas, which hopefully will drive home some of the points and give you food for thought, and maybe potentially help you shift a little bit your thinking in terms of how you're operating in your organization in these areas, in these arenas. So if we go to the next slide and start with the individual. Now, an early guest on my show was someone called Whitney Johnson, and she used to work with Clayton Christensen, who is author and arguably the sort of grandfather of innovation, of modern innovation thinking. He wrote Innovation in the Innovator's Dilemma way back when. He's written a number of other innovation books subsequent to that. He comes up with the concept of the job to be done, for instance. And she worked closely with him, actually running a fund for him. She originally came from Wall Street, investing in disruptive companies. And oddly enough, it turned out that she'd invested in Syngenta, which I didn't realize until I spoke to her. But anyway, she has written a book which I highly recommend called Disrupt Yourself. And many of us in industrial companies, under the threat of disruption from new entrants, changes in the regulatory environment, evolving customer tastes, and that's the world that many of us live in core corporate world, if you like. And on top of that, perhaps our jobs are undergoing change as a result of the industry changes. It could be changes from artificial intelligence. It could be changes from millennials. It could be changes from more and more well-educated emerging leaders coming out of China or coming out of India. And in this world where we will hopefully live far longer than our predecessors, but without the 6 to 8% growth in our asset base, in our 401k, in our pension funds that we've come to expect, and likewise in our company stock plans, it's really important as individuals and as professionals that we actually also future-proof ourselves and our careers as well as our businesses, and make sure that we've got this strategy for how do you actually deal with the disruption. And that's exactly what Whitney talks about. How do you actually ride the wave of disruption versus just coping? And so what Whitney does is she brings this concept of the S-curve, which many of you, if you're marketeers, will be aware of. This is around, the concept of the S-curve applies to how do disruptive ideas spread and products spread through cultures. And she applies it to you as an individual leading an innovation program in the workplace, whether you're an intrapreneur or a leader or an executive, as well as innovating with your career. And her point here is, I haven't got time to go into the details of it, but it's key to understand where you are on this wave of disruption in order to take full advantage of what are essentially exponential forces relating to how quickly you learn, relating to how quickly a product is adopted by the marketplace. So managing the reality of disruption at the individual level, be it in your career, be it in your role in the organization, and your role in innovation, is absolutely fundamental. Second piece around self, and I'm just giving you a glimpse of a couple of key distinctions, I think, is around the questions that you're asking. In Syngenta, we used to talk about breakthrough questions. So these are questions that have got two characteristics. They've got an enormous stretch ambition, but they've also got within it an embedded constraint. And they're hard to come up with these questions, but when you get them, they unleash all sorts of opportunity and open up all sorts of opportunity for you. Give you an example. I mean, in Syngenta, I had a challenge which was how to double the size of my business, but with no additional product development spend. IKEA, for instance, which is really, really good at this. They've built their business and their organization essentially over the 50 years purely by asking breakthrough questions. Their founder, Ingvar Kamprad, I mean, in his 20s when he founded IKEA, his breakthrough question was related to how can he take all the offcuts from these sawmills that he was visiting, which basically had no value, and which he was paid to take away. How can he convert those into valuable furniture? And that's basically the core of his. That was the root of the business. 50 years later, you can still find him in China negotiating with farmers to be paid to take the feathers from the chickens in the marketplace and to use them to stuff his pillows of his product. So that whole business is built on breakthrough questions which harness this stretch ambition and with this embedded constraint. Now you might be wondering why I'm talking, and Apple also do this very well. You might be wondering why this is important. If you go to the next slide, here is what this enables you to do is it enables you to create breakthrough questions which really are less around the resources that you have, but more around resourcefulness. So this is a gentleman called Adam Morgan, and he came up with the concept of challenger brands. And if you think about it, a challenge, and he's worked with major corporations like Unilever, like Nike, which do have challenger brands within their large brand portfolios. And the characteristics of challenger brands is they just don't have many resources. They don't have a brand. They don't have much funding. They don't necessarily have a market. And he's become an expert. And that characterizes much innovation that goes on in large organizations. We don't get properly resourced. We don't necessarily have the elements of market validation that enable us to get properly resourced. So what was a lovely story that he shared with me is, as they were launching this book, that the breakthrough question that they came up with is, how do we sell at least 5,000 copies of this book in a 14-day period by visiting in a 2-week period, visiting 14 cities across the United States without a single dollar of marketing budget. Now that's that number of books is, most business books don't get close to that number. They were looking to do it within 2 weeks without any breakthrough, without any spend. They were hugely successful, but this propelling question, this breakthrough question they used, and this is a hugely important point, was able to unleash and marshal huge resources in the ecosystem that they tapped into, which they were able to marshal and culminate in a fantastic book launch. And they were able to tap into companies like Google and Virgin Atlantic and a vodka brand to help them with this. But again, it started with recognition of the breakthrough question, a huge ambition, an enormous constraint, generated fantastic results. So second question, if we move to the next slide, we talked about the individual level. Let's talk about the team leader. So a really important question that I think we should all ask ourselves if we lead teams is, and this is either in a formal sense or as a project manager, as a leader, do you take up space or do you create space? And it's a difficult question to answer. Let me tell you how I think about it. I mean, when I was given a leadership role in Syngenta, in my first senior leadership role, I felt I had to have all the answers and to provide really clear direction, to focus on short-term performance, to develop and drive tight and ambitious meeting agendas. And in short, my team members would say I took up space. I was taking up space. And the number one job, I would argue, as a leader in this kind of work is to create space for your team. And this was a huge learning for me. This is difficult. And in many, as a result of matrix management, in many companies, we find what I call Noah's Ark management, where you have two of everything going on. And so the number one job of an individual of a leader is to knock down these barriers and to create the space for individuals to start exploring the unknown and start answering some of these breakthrough questions. And and this isn't so they can go home early. This is so they can actually have the right conversations with customers. And here on the right hand side is a toolkit that is literally, this book is being launched this week in the US. I've got no doubt it'll be a bestseller. It's going to be called Why Simple Wins. And this is all about creating space and killing stupid rules, getting, a great example. I was speaking to someone who works with a number of boards the other day, and she was telling me she gets to read all the board papers before a board meeting. She was describing how she went to, I can't believe the story, but she went to a Swiss company and she'd met with the executive, and then they were saying, well, we got the board papers waiting for you to pick up at the reception as you fly home to London. And she got downstairs, and the papers the box was too heavy for her even to lift. There were 2,000 pages of reading for this board meeting. And that's just a simple example of, how is it? Compare that with Amazon, for instance, where, there's no pre-read in any meetings at all. In actual fact, the first thing you do in any Amazon meeting is you spend 5 minutes reviewing a 2-page document which summarizes the case that's going to be discussed. So creating space, simplification, cutting through the sort of Noah's Ark management of the corporate world, hugely important, a big job for leaders. So if we go to the, and what that does is create space for the right conversation. So here's an example of a project that I led with my team, where we created space for the team, and we created a process called the curiosity conversation, which encouraged frontline sales staff. So these are people a long, long way away from corporate headquarters who are dreaming up these ideas like the curiosity conversation, enable them to have the right conversation with customers and create the space for those conversations to uncover opportunities. This is a $100 million opportunity we uncovered, which is in implementation at the moment. And it was initiated by the curiosity conversation, which was a methodology we developed. And I'm very happy to share with you the case study of this, because it was transformative for the grapes business, which is one of the businesses that I led. And here, that's not just me saying it, you can see what Goldman Sachs said about it. So again, creating space is a fundamental role of the leader in any kind of innovation related work. If we go to the next level, Hans, the third level is related to the organization. So we've done self, you as an individual, then we've done leader, the team, the environment you create. Third is the organization. And one of the key things that I've noticed in organizations, the biggest challenges, particularly in innovation, is to do with failure. Now most organizations are okay with failure so long as it's someone else who fails, right? I mean, or most managers will say, yeah, failure is great, so long as it's not me and so long as it's not you. And that's the reality of it. Organizations really struggle with the concept of failure. Intellectually, they can get their minds around it, but actually putting it into action, what does it mean, is really hard. And very, very few companies do it. Here's an example from Tata, which is a huge Indian diversified corporation. And they created this concept of the Dare to Try Awards, which is essentially awarded, as you can see here, to ideas that have failed. And so it signals to the organization that it is okay to fail. Really, really rare. Now, Syngenta, we couldn't do that. But what we did do, which I think was equally powerful, actually, was we set up project pre-mortems. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to confront the prospect of failure in advance and work backwards from that. This is what my previous boss used to call right to left thinking. If we know what bad looks like, let's work backwards. And what are the milestones and what needs to happen in order to avoid that outcome taking place. It's a very, very simple methodology. It's a hugely powerful methodology, very rarely used. But this is a way of getting to the core of, what could failure look like? What are the learning goals? And avoiding that outcome, but recognizing that it is a legitimate outcome. Next slide. Here's an example. We performed this a pre-mortem on this project, and this was we asked ourselves, what could bad look like? The context here, we had a $900 million molecule going off patent. And for those of you in pharmaceuticals listening, you'll know that the moment the patent falls in pharmaceuticals, literally 1 minute past 12, the trucks leave the generics companies stuffed full of pills, and they're selling them at pennies on the dollar. So as a result, you get a curve of molecular share and of value similar to that blue line, which is for a competitor product in the agricultural business. So we knew what bad looked like. massive decimation of the value of that product, over the next 3 years of the molecule coming off patent. So we took a different view. We did the pre-mortem, and we developed a strategy that basically enabled us, and these are actual figures, enabled us to maintain molecular share, which is unheard of in the industry to this level, to the level of north of 90%. We maintained value, and we grew the volume by 70%. I mean, a remarkable story, a great, a huge team effort, and I was just happily to be in the right place at the right time. But I do think that this began with a pre-mortem to actually identify what does bad look like, and let's try and avoid getting there. And the final piece of this story is that by being able to maintain that value and maintain that and grow that volume, the platform for new chemistry as you bring it in was far, far more robust, far broader, and and I kid you not, this has created hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of earnings for the company, and will continue to do so for some time. So that's an example of confronting the fear of failure, the prospect of failure, and developing a process to manage that essentially. Final slide, Hans, if you don't mind. Thank you for doing this. So the final piece is around the ecosystem, and I've touched on this a little bit earlier on. This, I believe, is the next frontier for 21st century managers. How to access the relationships, the capabilities, the customers from the players in your ecosystem. And because let's face it, it's increasingly unlikely that you will have all the resources that you need in the four walls of your organization. The world is getting more and more networked. There are more and more resources you can tap into. And if you are able to get really good at partnering with players in the ecosystem, the potential is exponential, I believe. And that's exacerbated by the virtual world, the connected world, the digital world. So a nice example here comes from the Brazilian coffee business, which I've talked about before. But if we go to the next slide, what we started, we started by understanding not just our customers, which is our growers, but then we wanted to understand our customers, which are the roasters, and then we wanted to understand the customers' needs, which are the consumers, you and I essentially. And by taking that ecosystem view, and on top of that, we also, we worked upstream with finance providers. We work with some of the certification agencies like Rainforest Alliance, like Fairtrade, which are the stakeholders, if you like, who are fundamental to this ecosystem, to make sure they supported this program at the grower level. And this has been a hugely successful business, one that Nestle are trying to copy, they haven't managed to. The competition are trying to copy, they haven't managed to. And this culminated in the Financial Times referring to Syngenta as the Apple of agribusiness. And I'm not saying that to impress you, although it does actually impress me, but just to impress on you what is possible by connecting with the ecosystem. And actually, as it happens, the company I'm chairman of, this genomic software company, is very active in the ecosystem with some big ecosystem players. And we're finding all sorts of opportunities come out of that. And these are opportunities to leverage other people's resources, other people's assets, other people's infrastructure. So it's a wonderful model if you can get your mind around it, but it does mean you got to make yourself really, really easy to do business with, which isn't always easy for companies. So let me just come back to the model, and then I'm going to hand over to Hans. I've given you a helicopter trip across some of the, over some of the approaches that we use, some of the tools that we've developed, some of the foundational knowledge, if you like, that really make a difference in some of these domains of innovation. And it's really just a glimpse of stuff that we're developing to help you and your organization become more innovative and more entrepreneurial. There are lots of ways of doing this work. I'm not kidding you. I mean, there are many approaches you can use to get these results. What I've done is, I think, distill down for you and for me and for my listeners and my clients and my organizations, what are the key elements of this foundational knowledge. And just to wrap up before I hand back to Hans, you might have caught a glimpse of something that fits here with your vision. And maybe you've heard an example that echoes your own situation, or perhaps you feel that you could have your hands on one of these tools that you can use straight away to make a difference and to move forward. So I hope that's the case. Let's pause here. I'll pass back to Hans for questions, and then we can take the conversation forward. So over to you, Hans.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Already one question that I wanted to pass to you, and if for those of you on the line have more burning questions, please type them in the chat box or the Q&A box, and I'll try to get most of them answered. We have a couple of minutes. So Mark, the first question that came in by George was self-team organization ecosystem. I get that, he says, and then his question is, how do you know where to focus at any given point in time?
Well, I mean, the answer is, I mean, the trite answer is, it depends. I mean, I would argue that you've always got to keep an eye on self. I mean, that's where, irrespective of whether you're a new employee or whether you're the chief executive, you've got to keep, it's all, self-awareness is so fundamental in this business because you are creating all sorts of, ripples in your organization. If there are specific, I mean, I'll give you an example. We didn't touch on purpose. I referred to Rob Swan. I mean, the concept of purpose is really fundamental to any organization, to maintain its, to ensure its sustainability over time. And a purpose-driven culture it's well known. It's proven to generate far higher returns, higher retention rates, more innovation than an organization that perhaps is, has profit right at its center. So if you take the concept of purpose, once, what we did in Syngenta, we not only developed the purpose, which I would argue is at the organizational level. So this was a purpose for the whole company, and the purpose was bringing plant potential to life. Then what we did is we would take that concept and we would ensure that every single individual understood what did that mean for them in their, at the personal level, not just intellectually, but also almost viscerally in their gut. And we would also then say, well, what does it mean for the team? Is our team's agenda in line with the overall purpose of the organization? So I guess what I'm saying is, these are lenses that you look through. But if all you're doing is focus on self, you're never going to get anywhere. You've got to do the work there. But by the same token, you can't take your eye off the ball of any of the other ones as well.
Thanks for that. This is a question I would like to hear your answer to as well. How do you manage interest, team versus organization? So that's the question. So I assume it's about if there's different, let's say, interest between this team and the organization, how do you manage that as an innovation leader?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, can you give me a specific example, Hans? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I think the question is around, so suppose your team, you have a goal as a team, and then of course there's an organization that may or may not support that goal or may not provide the resources for you to get to that goal. So how do you manage that balance?
Well, I mean, if there needs to be some kind of alignment, right? And if there isn't any alignment, then frankly, I'd question what's the team doing? Is it working on the right stuff? Now, there might be some long-term alignment, but some short-term resource constraints, which is often the case. And there, I think this comes back to this idea of, it's not about the resources that you have access to; it's about your resourcefulness. And we all know being innovators, being entrepreneurs does require a level of maverick behavior, does require a little bit of sort of guerrilla tactics to get stuff done. But I think the assumption here is that that there is some level of alignment between what you're doing and what your organization is doing. Mm-hmm. I spoke to the head of innovation for a large Swiss bank, and his model was that the team is almost like a SWAT team or a SEAL team that go. Their mandate is actually to disrupt the organization, and so clearly that's an example of a team where there's no if they're not making ripples, they're not working hard enough, they're not being effective. But by and large, I think you've got to, again, it comes back to what is the purpose of the team and how does that fit into the overall organizational mandate, if you like.
Makes sense. Thank you, Mark. So many great nuggets of wisdom in just 45 minutes or whatever time we spent. So what strikes me is you really make these seemingly complex things quite simple and doable. So I'm also really pleased that you decided basically to offer your support to innovators on these teams we discussed today, basically offering others the support you wish you had while being on the job as an entrepreneur and executive. So I'm pleased also because it really speaks to what I'm hearing back at the conference and events that we host. A lot of people asking us, hey, these methods and frameworks, it's all very nice, but what about me as an innovator? So could you share a bit more about the program that you have developed?
Yeah, of course I can, Hans. I mean, let me introduce you to the Innovation Leadership Circle. Essentially, its aim is to help accelerate your innovation agenda in the first 100 days of 2017. That's essentially what we want to do, to help accelerate your innovation agenda, your 2017 innovation agenda. And this is really, first of all, it's worth saying this program isn't for everyone. But this is a program that I wish I had access to in Syngenta. It's built on a lot of what we did in Syngenta, to be fair, in terms of a focus on 100 days, in terms of using new technology in a different way. But and 100 days is important because it's long enough to make measurable progress in a reasonable period of time. But we've added a couple of different, two elements to it, two external perspective, Hands. Firstly, we've brought in peers from other organizations in a safe and trusted and collaborative environment to share their learnings and their experiences to accelerate growth, if you like. And then secondly, we're going to be bringing in some externals, some of whom I mentioned on the earlier on guests on the podcast, who have unique, and these are world-renowned experts in their areas, and they have unique perspectives on innovation, change, and leadership, which I think will be valuable for this group, for the Innovation Leadership Circle. So, as I say, it's not for everyone. Let me tell you for whom it is. I mean, essentially, we designed it with directors, VPs, BU, and functional heads in mind. I mean, people like me, people like many of you on the call, essentially. People who are curious and bold and who want to innovate and experience not just in what they do, but more importantly in how they do it. So that's the first sort of criteria, I guess. And many of you being on the call and exploring this, I think, fit into this category. But it's worth calling out. This is not your, this is not your everyday innovation program. There are lots of those out there. This is something different. This is something that adds value very, very quickly and will be transformative, I believe, in your business. But it isn't for everyone. Secondly, for those who've got innovation at the heart of the 2017 business and functional agenda. Again, this needs to move the needle in the organization for it to make sense. In Syngenta, we had programs, on the $2 billion business that I ran, I'd say you can't, we're not going to do anything we can't see moving the needle, which means line of sight to at least $100 million of revenue. Now, I'm not saying that's the filter here at all, but it does need to be meaningful. If you've got an innovation project that might be generating $50,000 of excess revenues, then frankly, this won't be for you. It's got to be relevant. It's got to be chunky. It's got to be meaningful. Thirdly, that likely it is that you recognise you do need to access additional resources and learn from others. Be part of a network. And do this in a time and cost-effective manner. And finally, placing value on building capabilities and networks and making a difference to your teams and to your organisations, to your ecosystems. So these are kind of criteria that we had in mind when we developed the ILC, the Innovation Leadership Circle. And of course, Hans, you went out and talked to your network of your client base, your customer base, and many of them said similar things, that they're looking for this kind of thing anyway, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So we designed it with these kinds of people in mind. Now, in terms of what is it, just introducing it very quickly, it's a 100-day program kicking off at the end of November, likely ending through in March. As I said earlier on, to develop and accelerate solutions, capabilities, relationships in a safe and trusted space, really to accelerate and innovate and deliver your innovation agenda in the first 100 days of 2017. We're limiting it to between 12 and maximum of 15 innovation leaders. This does need to be sufficiently exclusive, if you like, the right kinds of people with the right kinds of issues from multiple industries and organizations, not just mature, regulated, long product life cycle industries that are under threat from disruption, but potentially technology companies, high-tech companies, but all of whom have an agenda and all of whom fit the criteria I shared earlier on. The model is a peer-to-peer action learning model. We're modeling digital leadership. This is one of these core skills which I think is increasingly important to master, particularly in the large organizations where we might spend 20, 30, 40% of our time on conference calls, on telcos. It's really difficult to maximize the capability, the potential of one's organization in this environment. There are things you can do, however, that really do make an enormous difference in this environment, and we're modeling that. This is one of those skills that it's rather like, I wish I'd learned how to present, and I'm not particularly good at it anyway, but I wish I'd learned when I was much, much younger, to be able to develop, certain core foundational skills have a transformative effect on one's career. And I personally believe this is one of them. Be supported, as I mentioned earlier on, by experts, by tools and by resources, some of which I've touched on earlier on. And the model here, we kick off with a one-day face-to-face event at one of the circle leaders' facilities, and then we go online to a series of 6 online circles happening every other week, from 5 till 7 Swiss time or European time. So one can weave this into one's work calendar without the traditional disruption of having to get on aeroplanes, having to travel to locations, having to get out of time zones, out of sync with what you're trying to do on the day job. And then we'd also supplement this with some one-on-one coaching, which I would provide to help you on your individual journey. But recognizing this is essentially, you'll be part of a community of, an action learning community of innovation leaders. Is that sufficient for you, Hans?
I think it's clear. So the only question I have, what should I do if I want to hear more or sign up for it?
Yeah, okay. So, this, as I said, this isn't for everyone, and we do need to make sure we get the right kinds of individuals from the right kinds of organizations participating. So the process we've got here is we'd invite you to fill in an application form, probably takes 15 minutes to do, which tells us a little bit about you and about your business, your objectives, some of your experiences, if you like, and then we'll come back to you very quickly and most likely set up a call for an ongoing conversation to get into it in more detail. So if you go to the website, a number of places, you can either email me or Hans directly. Our email addresses are here, or go on to the website, innovationecosystem.com, and you can contact us there. Click through to there's a banner actually there. You can click through to the details of the site, and we'll be in touch with you once you've filled in that application form, or once we've received an email from you.